June 4, 1944. 3,000 feet above the hedgerows of Normandy, Captain Robert Johnson drops his right hand to the bomb release switch mounted beside his throttle quadrant. Beneath his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, two 500-pound bombs hang from wing racks that were never supposed to be there. Below him, German panzer tanks are retreating from Allied advance units, their steel hulls grinding through narrow French roads that offer no protection from what's coming. Johnson's Thunderbolt weighs 8 tons, fully loaded. It's the heaviest single-seat fighter in the world, designed to escort bombers at 30,000 feet, where thin air and enemy interceptors determine survival. But today, he's carrying ordnance that transforms his fighter into something German doctrine never anticipated. A fighter that bombs. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The bomb release mechanism engages with a metallic click, 2,500 pounds of high explosive separate from the aircraft. Johnson pulls back hard on the stick, his 850 caliber machine guns already tracking a German half-track that's scattering infantry like leaves in a storm. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine roars through 2,800 RPM, delivering power that no air-cooled radial was supposed to sustain at combat loading. For 3 years, German pilots had watched American fighters with a mixture of contempt and calculation. The P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin booms, the P-51 Mustang with its liquid-cooled elegance. But the Thunderbolt was different. When it first appeared over occupied Europe in April 1943, Luftwaffe pilots radioed their controllers with descriptions that bordered on disbelief. Captain Werner Schroer of Fighter Wing 26 called them barrels. Major Joseph Priller described them as flying milk jugs. The mockery was understandable. At 10,000 pounds empty, the P-47 dwarfed every fighter in the European theatre. Its massive radial engine created a frontal profile that made German pilots question American aerodynamic sanity. Compared to the lean Messerschmitt Bf 109 or the angular Focke-Wulf 190, the Thunderbolt looked like industrial overreach made manifest in aluminum and steel. German fighter tactics had evolved through 4 years of combat refinement. Their aircraft prioritized climb rate and turning radius. The Bf 109 could reach 20,000 feet in 7 minutes. The 190 could execute a complete turn in 22 seconds. Both aircraft weighed less than 7,000 pounds fully loaded, their designs optimized for the knife-fight dynamics of air-to-air combat, where agility determined survival. The Thunderbolt violated every assumption that German engineers had validated through combat experience. It climbed slowly. It turned reluctantly. At low altitude, where German fighters controlled the engagement envelope through superior maneuverability, the P-47 seemed destined for tactical irrelevance. But American engineers had been solving a different problem. While German designers pursued performance optimization, Republic Aviation's Alexander Kartveli designed for strategic sustainability. The Thunderbolt's 2,800 horsepower radial engine could survive battle damage that would destroy inline engines. Its armored cockpit protected pilots from cannon fire that penetrated lighter aircraft. Most critically, its robust airframe could absorb modifications that would compromise structural integrity in conventional fighters. Spring 1943 brought the first validation of Kartveli's design philosophy. On May 4, 117 P-47s from 3 fighter groups escorted B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24. Liberators attacking Antwerp and Paris. The mission revealed both the Thunderbolt's capabilities and its limitations in ways that would reshape American tactical doctrine. German fighters attacked with tactics refined through years of combat experience. They climbed above the American formation, then dove at speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour, firing concentrated bursts from their 20mm cannons before climbing back to altitude beyond effective defensive fire. The Thunderbolt pilots, many flying their first combat mission, discovered that their aircraft possessed unexpected advantages in this specific combat regime. The P-47 couldn't outturn German fighters. But when Luftwaffe pilots initiated their characteristic high-speed dives, Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could follow. The massive radial engine and robust airframe that made the aircraft sluggish in turning fights translated into devastating dive performance. Fully loaded P-47s reached speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour in vertical descent, faster than any German fighter could sustain without structural failure. More importantly, the Thunderbolt's 850 caliber machine guns delivered firepower that German pilots had never encountered from single-seat fighters. Each gun carried 425 rounds of armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer ammunition. When all 8 weapons fired simultaneously, they produced a stream of 100 bullets per second, converging in a kill zone approximately 6 feet wide. German pilots who survived encounters with Thunderbolts described the experience as flying through a wall of steel. By summer 1943, the tactical dynamic began shifting in ways that German intelligence struggled to explain. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer, with 220 confirmed victories, noted that Thunderbolts could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. His assessment reflected growing recognition that American fighters had been designed with different priorities than European combat experience suggested. The escort mission initially defined the Thunderbolt's combat role. American strategic bombing doctrine required fighter protection for B-17 and B-24 formations, penetrating deep into German industrial territory. The Spitfires that British forces deployed lacked range to accompany bombers beyond the English Channel. The P-38 Lightning offered better range but remained vulnerable to mechanical problems at high altitude, where sub-zero temperatures froze hydraulic systems and disabled turbochargers. The Thunderbolt promised to solve the escort problem through brute force engineering. Its massive fuel capacity and turbo-supercharged engine maintained performance at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, where German interceptors struggled with power loss and pilot fatigue. But early operations revealed a fundamental limitation that threatened to undermine the entire strategic bombing campaign. Range remained insufficient for deep penetration missions. Even with internal fuel capacity exceeding 300 gallons, P-47s could escort bombers only to the German border before fuel reserves required return to England. German fighter controllers recognized this limitation immediately and concentrated their interceptor forces beyond escort range, waiting to attack American bombers after their fighter protection departed. The solution emerged through improvisation that would define American tactical adaptation throughout the war. Engineers developed drop tanks that mounted beneath the Thunderbolt's fuselage, carrying 75 to 100 gallons of additional fuel that could be jettisoned when empty. By July 1943, P-47s equipped with belly tanks could escort bombers to targets inside Germany, maintaining formation at 24,000 feet where the Thunderbolt's turbo-supercharger provided decisive performance advantages. The tactical breakthrough came from understanding that the P-47's apparent disadvantages could be transformed into strategic assets through proper employment. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, developed combat tactics that exploited the Thunderbolt's specific characteristics. His fighters flew 4,000 feet above the bomber formation, using altitude advantage to dictate engagement terms. When German fighters attacked, Thunderbolt pilots dove at maximum speed, using superior dive performance to intercept enemy aircraft before they could reach the bombers. September 1943 brought the escort mission to its peak effectiveness. On raids to Stuttgart and Frankfurt, P-47s maintained bomber protection throughout the entire mission profile, engaging German fighters at ranges that Luftwaffe controllers had considered safe. American bomber losses decreased from 20% on unescorted missions to less than 3% when Thunderbolts provided continuous protection. But Allied commanders were already recognizing that the Thunderbolt's capabilities extended beyond its designed role. Pilots returning from escort missions regularly engaged ground targets of opportunity, strafing German airfields, rail yards, and vehicle convoys with their 8 machine guns. These impromptu ground attacks revealed something that would transform tactical air warfare. The same characteristics that made the Thunderbolt effective at high altitude made it devastatingly lethal at low altitude when employed against ground targets. The robust airframe could survive ground fire that would destroy lighter fighters. The air-cooled radial engine remained operational despite battle damage that would cripple liquid-cooled engines through coolant loss. The heavy armament that could destroy enemy fighters could also penetrate armored vehicles, locomotives, and fortified positions. By late 1943, Republic Aviation began modifying P-47 production to accommodate external ordnance beyond drop tanks. Early versions carried a single 500-pound bomb beneath the fuselage centerline. Mid-production models added wing racks capable of mounting either 1,000 pounds of bombs or M8 4.5-inch rockets. The final D variant, entering service in spring 1944, could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs plus 10 high-velocity aircraft rockets beneath strengthened wings. The transformation occurred with remarkable speed. In April 1943, the Thunderbolt had been a pure fighter struggling with range limitations and tactical doctrine uncertainty. By December 1943, it had evolved into America's primary fighter bomber, capable of performing dual roles that German aviation doctrine considered mutually exclusive. A fighter could escort bombers or attack ground targets, but conventional engineering wisdom insisted that no single aircraft could excel at both missions. American pragmatism rejected this assumption. The Thunderbolt's massive size and robust construction, initially viewed as design compromises, enabled modifications that would have been impossible with lighter airframes. Wing strengthening required to carry external ordnance added negligible weight penalty to an aircraft already weighing 8 tons. Bomb release mechanisms integrated into existing electrical systems without requiring fundamental redesign. Most critically, pilots discovered that the aircraft's high-speed performance remained uncompromised even when carrying full external loads. Winter 1943 brought organizational changes that would define the Thunderbolt's ultimate contribution to Allied victory. The 9th Air Force, reformed in October after operations in North Africa and Italy, established itself along England's south coast with a specific mission profile. The Tactical Air Command would support ground forces during the invasion of France, providing close air support, interdiction of enemy logistics, and destruction of German armor that threatened Allied advance. The P-47 became the 9th Air Force's primary weapon system. By May 1944, 13 fighter groups had transitioned to Thunderbolts modified specifically for ground attack roles. These aircraft featured upgraded engines producing 2,300 horsepower with water injection emergency power. They carried improved bomb racks and rocket launchers developed through combat feedback from Mediterranean operations. Most importantly, they operated from bases within minutes of planned invasion beaches, enabling rapid response to ground force requests for air support. German intelligence recognized the transformation but struggled to develop effective countermeasures. Luftwaffe technical reports from early 1944 described American fighters carrying bomb loads previously associated with dedicated attack aircraft. Wehrmacht commanders reported that Allied fighter bombers were destroying German supply convoys, rail networks, and armored formations with effectiveness that exceeded specialized ground attack aircraft. The strategic implications extended beyond individual mission success rates. Germany had developed the Focke-Wulf 190F variant specifically for ground attack, accepting performance compromises that limited its effectiveness in air-to-air combat. The Soviet Union deployed the Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik, a specialized attack aircraft that required fighter escort protection. Britain's Hawker Typhoon excelled at ground attack, but performed poorly as a high-altitude interceptor. America had created something different. The Thunderbolt maintained air superiority capabilities while simultaneously carrying ordnance loads that matched or exceeded dedicated attack aircraft. This dual capability meant that every P-47 sortie could engage enemy fighters during transit to target areas, deliver precise ground attack against armor or infrastructure, then return to escort bomber formations if required. No other air force possessed comparable tactical flexibility from a single aircraft type. The German response revealed fundamental limitations in Axis strategic planning. Luftwaffe resources remained committed to defensive operations against Allied strategic bombing. Ground attack missions were assigned to increasingly obsolete aircraft types that suffered catastrophic losses against Allied air superiority. Wehrmacht commanders requesting close air support discovered that German fighters prioritized bomber interception over ground support, leaving armor formations vulnerable to Allied tactical air power. By spring 1944, the tactical balance had shifted decisively. American fighter-bomber groups operated with confidence born from 6 months of training and combat validation. Pilots understood how to employ 2,500-pound bomb loads against hardened targets. Ground crews had refined maintenance procedures that kept aircraft operational despite intensive sortie rates. Most critically, tactical doctrine had evolved to exploit the Thunderbolt's specific capabilities in ways that German defences could not effectively counter. The final validation would come in Normandy, where German forces would discover that American air power had evolved beyond anything Wehrmacht tactical planning anticipated. But first, the aircraft that German pilots had mocked as flying barrels would demonstrate capabilities that would redefine ground warfare itself. The morning of June 6, 1944 began before dawn for Captain Arlo Henry of the 387th Fighter Squadron. His P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed Turnip Termite, carried 2,000-pound bombs beneath its wings, ordnance that transformed a fighter designed for high-altitude combat into something Wehrmacht commanders had never encountered. Below him, in the pre-dawn darkness, the largest amphibious invasion in history was unfolding across 5 Normandy beaches. Henry's squadron orbited at 250 feet above the English Channel, their massive radial engines synchronized to a mission that would define tactical air warfare. Beneath the murk, in the wet green fields of France, Henry came upon a formation of lead-grey Tiger tanks. The sight represented everything German doctrine considered impenetrable: 56-ton behemoths mounting 88mm guns, their frontal armour capable of deflecting any projectile except direct artillery hits. But Henry possessed something Tiger commanders couldn't defend against. He pushed his throttle forward and rolled into a dive that accelerated his 8-ton Thunderbolt beyond 400 miles per hour. At 1,500 feet, he pickled his bombs, 2,000 pounds of high explosive separated from the wing racks. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine roared through emergency power as Henry pulled hard on the stick, his airframe shuddering under G-forces that would have torn lighter fighters apart. The bombs impacted with mathematical precision, not on the Tigers themselves, which could withstand near misses, but on their supporting vehicles, half-tracks carrying fuel and ammunition, trucks loaded with spare parts. The command vehicles contained radios and maps that coordinated panzer operations. When the smoke cleared, the Tiger tanks remained intact but operationally paralyzed, stranded without fuel, ammunition, or communication with higher command. Across Normandy, this scenario repeated with devastating efficiency. When the Allies began to push inland, they had fighter cover on call. Orbiting at 3,500 feet, Thunderbolts swooped down to rake German trucks, trains, and troop columns with their 850 caliber Brownings. A 3-second burst put 23 pounds of bullets into the target, 75 2-ounce slugs, lethal from 4 miles away. The tactical revolution became apparent through statistics that Wehrmacht intelligence struggled to explain. On June 8th, the 50th Fighter Bomber Group's daily action report documented 16 P-47 seconds, attacking a tank column of 12-plus vehicles at Cerisy-la-Forêt at 1440 hours. Many were left burning and demolished. About 30 bombs were dropped on these tanks, and they were strafed as well. A single squadron had destroyed in minutes what would have required hours of artillery bombardment or days of infantry assault. German commanders recognized immediately that they faced unprecedented tactical challenges. Nikolaus von Below, Adolf Hitler's Luftwaffe adjutant, recalled that from the outset, enemy air superiority was clear-cut. By that same evening, it was already clear the invasion was a success. The assessment reflected growing awareness that American air power had evolved beyond anything German defensive planning anticipated. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had warned about this precise scenario. Rommel feared that Allied air superiority would expose the panzers to devastating fighter-bomber attacks, preventing their movement. He wanted every tank as near to the coast as possible, where in his view the battle would be won or lost. His assessment proved prophetic as P-47 seconds systematically destroyed German armoured formations attempting to reinforce defensive positions. The weight of ordnance delivered by Thunderbolts exceeded anything German tactical doctrine considered possible from single-seat fighters. Each P-47 carried either 2,000-pound bombs or 3 500-pound bombs, or 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. The firepower matched dedicated ground attack aircraft while maintaining air superiority capabilities that allowed Thunderbolt pilots to engage Luftwaffe interceptors during transit to target areas. Lieutenant John Fetzer, Flying Wing 4. Captain Henry later recalled the destruction with vivid precision. He looked down at vehicles and people everywhere, bodies lying all over. The formation of jugs continued inland at near treetop level. The low-altitude approach sacrificed defensive advantage but maximized targeting accuracy, allowing pilots to identify specific vehicles and strike with precision that heavy bombers couldn't achieve. German responses revealed the psychological impact of constant air attack. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, issued an edict to all unit commanders, stating that Enemy Number 1 is the enemy air force, which, because of its absolute superiority, tries to destroy our spearheads of attacks and our artillery through fighter-bomber attacks, and to render movements in rear areas impossible. The assessment acknowledged that German ground forces had lost freedom of maneuver, the fundamental requirement for mobile warfare. The Thunderbolt's survivability under fire exceeded German expectations based on previous encounters with Allied fighters. The P-47 was renowned for its exceptional durability and ability to absorb significant battle damage while still returning home. This made it particularly valuable for low-altitude ground attack missions where aircraft were vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. The robust radial engine could sustain multiple hits from 20mm cannon fire and continue operating, while the armored cockpit protected pilots from ground fire that would have been fatal in lighter aircraft. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The pace of operations intensified as Allied ground forces expanded their beachhead. Photos taken in France in the summer of 1944 show German troops anxiously scanning the skies for attackers. The constant threat transformed tactical behavior. German units that had previously moved in daylight now operated exclusively at night, accepting the operational inefficiency to avoid air attack. Supply convoys traveled after dark using minimal lighting, resulting in traffic accidents and delays that disrupted logistics more effectively than direct bombing. The ordnance carried by P-47 seconds proved particularly effective against German armor when employed with proper tactics. For heavier game, the Panther, Tiger and King Tiger tanks infesting the hedgerow country, there were underwing bazookas and rail-launched 5-inch rockets. While rockets rarely achieved direct hits on moving tanks, their psychological effect and effectiveness against supply vehicles created operational paralysis that tactical maneuver couldn't overcome. Colonel Hubert Zemke's 56th Fighter Group pioneered the ground attack tactics that other units replicated across the theatre. Wolfpack planes flew so low they often returned to Boxstead with tree damage. Zemke himself once came back with a telephone line wrapped around his prop. The ultra-low altitude approach sacrificed safety margins but maximized surprise, allowing Thunderbolts to attack before German anti-aircraft crews could respond effectively. The statistical impact became apparent through combat reports that documented destruction rates unprecedented in tactical warfare. In Europe in summer 1944, the Army Air Force had about 1,300 light bomber crews and 4,500 fighter pilots. They claimed destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 68,000 trucks, and 6,000 tanks and armored artillery pieces. P-47 Thunderbolts alone dropped 120,000 tons of bombs and thousands of tanks of napalm, fired 135 million bullets and 60,000 rockets, and claimed 4,000 enemy planes destroyed. The numbers represented a complete transformation of tactical aviation from supporting element to dominant force, determining ground campaign outcomes. German commanders attempting to maneuver armored formations discovered that American air power had rendered traditional panzer tactics obsolete. Units attempting daylight movement attracted immediate attention from orbiting P-47 seconds. On the 17th, a squadron of P-47 seconds from the 365th Fighter Group, the famous Hellhawks, caught a mechanized column in the Pretha River Valley, destroying at least 50 of its vehicles. Single squadron actions achieved destruction rates that previously required entire bomber wings. The psychological transformation proved as significant as physical destruction. Beyond the destruction itself, the appearance of unopposed Allied fighter bombers ruined morale, as privates and generals alike dove for the ditches. German soldiers who had endured artillery bombardment and infantry assault discovered that air attack produced paralyzing fear that degraded unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Wehrmacht after-action reports from July 1944 revealed growing recognition that German forces faced an insurmountable disadvantage. Tank commanders reported that moving their vehicles in daylight invited destruction within minutes. Artillery positions revealed by muzzle flash attracted P-47 strikes before gun crews could displace. Supply convoys attempting to reach forward units found roads blocked by destroyed vehicles from previous air attacks. The tactical flexibility inherent in the P-47's dual-role capability compounded German defensive problems. American commanders could deploy Thunderbolts for bomber escort missions, then redirect them to ground attack based on developing tactical situations. German fighters optimized for intercepting bombers couldn't perform an equivalent ground attack without accepting catastrophic losses to anti-aircraft fire. By mid-July, the operational tempo had established patterns that would characterize Allied air superiority throughout the campaign. All day, at any particular moment, hundreds of P-47 seconds were ranging across France and patrolling over the beachhead. The constant presence created conditions where German ground forces operated under perpetual threat, unable to maneuver freely or concentrate forces for counterattacks. The irony became apparent through intelligence assessments comparing pre-invasion assumptions with combat reality. German tactical doctrine had emphasized armor concentration and mobile warfare as decisive advantages over Allied infantry-heavy formations. But American air power had inverted this calculus. German armor attempting to concentrate became priority targets for P-47 strikes. Mobile operations that depended on daylight movement became suicide missions executed under constant air attack. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German forces in the West, expressed the exasperation felt by many soldiers when he told his captors that air attacks had made it impossible to bring one single railroad train across the Rhine. The assessment, though somewhat exaggerated, captured the strategic paralysis created by tactical air dominance. German logistics that had supported mechanized campaigns across Europe collapsed under sustained air interdiction. The transformation from pure fighter to fighter-bomber had occurred with remarkable speed. In April 1943, P-47 seconds had struggled with range limitations and unclear tactical doctrine. By June 1944, they had evolved into America's most effective ground attack aircraft, capable of performing missions that no other fighter could execute. The massive airframe that German pilots had mocked as flying barrels now delivered ordnance loads that exceeded specialized attack aircraft while maintaining air superiority capabilities. The Hellhawks and other P-47 groups operating from captured French airfields discovered that proximity to front lines enabled response times measured in minutes rather than hours. Ground. Controllers could request air support and have Thunderbolts overhead within 15 minutes, attacking with precision that artillery couldn't match. The responsiveness transformed close air support from theoretical concept into decisive tactical advantage. By August 1944, the cumulative effect had become undeniable. German armoured forces that had dominated European battlefields through mobile warfare now found themselves trapped in static defensive positions. The panzers remained formidable in direct combat, but air interdiction prevented them from reaching combat zones or maneuvering once engaged. American ground forces advanced with confidence born from knowing that enemy armor concentrations would be destroyed from the air before they could influence battlefield outcomes. The Thunderbolt had proven something that pre-war aviation theory considered impossible. A single aircraft type could dominate both air-to-air and air-to-ground combat, performing dual roles that conventional wisdom insisted required specialized designs. The robust construction that made the P-47 heavy and sluggish in turning fights translated into survivability under ground fire and capacity to carry devastating ordnance loads. German fighter pilots who survived the Normandy campaign transmitted combat reports describing American fighters that defied their understanding of tactical aviation. Thunderbolts attacked ground targets with bomb loads matching medium bombers, then climbed to altitude and engaged Luftwaffe interceptors with performance matching pure fighters. The dual capability created situations where German pilots faced opponents that controlled every aspect of aerial and ground warfare simultaneously. The ultimate validation came through strategic assessments conducted after the campaign concluded. Key to making Allied air power so overwhelming was the routine use of Republic's P-47 Thunderbolt as a swing-roll fighter bomber, sent to take on the Luftwaffe's pilots and airplanes, as well as Germany's mechanized ground forces. The aircraft that had been designed as a high-altitude interceptor had evolved into the decisive weapon determining ground campaign outcomes. The transformation revealed fundamental truths about tactical aviation that would influence military doctrine for generations. Survivability mattered more than performance specifications. Versatility trumped optimization. Industrial capacity to produce thousands of capable aircraft exceeded the value of smaller numbers of technically superior machines. The P-47 embodied these principles in ways that German aviation doctrine, with its emphasis on specialized aircraft for specific missions, never anticipated. By September 1944, as Allied forces advanced across France toward Germany itself, the Thunderbolt's role had expanded beyond tactical support to strategic interdiction. P-47 groups ranged deep behind German lines, destroying locomotives, severing railway bridges, and systematically dismantling the transportation infrastructure that sustained Wehrmacht operations. The attacks created cascading failures throughout German logistics, starving frontline units of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. The psychological impact on German commanders became apparent through interrogations conducted after the war. Officers who had planned operations based on traditional military principles discovered that American air power had rendered those principles obsolete. Armor concentration attracted air attack. Daylight movement invited destruction. The fundamental premise of mobile warfare, that mechanized forces could maneuver faster than opponents could respond, collapsed when opponents possessed air superiority, measured not just in fighters, but in fighter-bombers carrying devastating ordnance. The Thunderbolt's 2,500-pound bomb load represented the culmination of engineering innovation driven by combat necessity. Republic aviation had transformed an aircraft designed for one mission into a weapons system that redefined tactical warfare. The modifications required strengthened wings, upgraded bomb racks, improved release mechanisms, and enhanced pilot training. But the fundamental airframe remained unchanged, demonstrating that robust initial design enabled adaptations that specialized aircraft couldn't accommodate. The final irony emerged from examining German technical responses to the P-47 threat. Luftwaffe engineers understood the theoretical principles that made fighter bombers effective, but German industry, stretched beyond capacity, producing fighters for bomber defense and replacements for catastrophic losses, couldn't develop equivalent capabilities. The Focke-Wulf 190F variant attempted to match Thunderbolt ground attack performance, but accepting the structural reinforcement and ordnance capacity required sacrifices in air-to-air performance that rendered the aircraft vulnerable to American escorts. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt carrying 2,500 pounds of bombs into combat reveals more than tactical innovation. It demonstrates how American industrial pragmatism, combined with willingness to adapt proven designs for new missions, created capabilities that specialized engineering couldn't match. German pilots who had mocked the barrel-shaped fighter in 1943 discovered by 1944 that the aircraft they had dismissed dominated every aspect of aerial warfare through combination of firepower, survivability, and versatility. The transformation from escort fighter to fighter bomber occurred not through radical redesign, but through recognition that the P-47's apparent disadvantages, its massive size and heavy construction, enabled capabilities that lighter fighters couldn't achieve. The same characteristics that made the aircraft sluggish in turning fights provided survivability under ground fire and capacity to deliver ordnance loads that tactical doctrine never imagined possible from single-seat fighters. By war's end, the statistical record confirmed what combat experience had demonstrated throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond. From D-Day, the invasion of Europe launched June 8, 1944, until VE Day on May 7, 1945. Pilots flying the Thunderbolt destroyed enemy equipment that included thousands of armored vehicles, locomotives, and support infrastructure. The numbers represented systematic destruction of German ground forces through air power, applied with precision and persistence that no defensive measures could counter. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.